Hey guys, it's Silver again, and today I'm going to be making a video about 1 week before the new moon about ancestral trauma. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I have been doing a lot of work helping people through ancestral trauma seems to be coming to the surface, and I'll explain some of the reasons why that might be happening. And I feel that it's also happening for me. And I think that there is a collective need to heal from this. And I think that is because right now our earth is in such a place of shifting that we are going to have to drastically change our lives to being able to live lives that fulfill us and make us happy and make us healthy. And it's just, we cannot carry this baggage around with us anymore. We can't carry essentially any baggage with us anymore if we are going to walk over the mountain to the higher timeline, to the better place. We need to be willing to leave basically everything behind. And I mean that metaphorically, it might be physically. Um, it's an important shift right now. So a lot of earth shifts are happening right now that have to do with um, us being taken off galactic quarantine is what they have called it. But if you look, we are actually having a lot more astronomical activity in our solar system. So um, there are a lot of meteors and asteroids, and we've had one close calls with ones that would have damaged us that somehow just exploded before hitting us. That I believe was us being protected in some way, synchronistically, even though it may have just been energetic. Um, the surface of our planet is radioactive, and the vibration of our planet has actually changed in frequency, and we're actually closer to 440 now than we were before. And there's a lot of solar flares causing a lot of ups and downs in energy, which also causes the ability for us to evolve very quickly, and or mutate if it goes badly, and if you want to call positive evolution and then negative mutation. So right now things need to change, and it's a good thing. Things always change, and there's nothing we can do about that. So we need to go along and make it into a good change, or it will be a bad change. Um, Carrying around ancestral trauma is something that a lot of people don't even understand how it works. People don't understand that they're carrying that baggage around. And in about a week, we're going to be going into the new moon, and that is the best time to do shadow work, and that's because the moon is in the shadow, and we're no longer it sort of disconnects us from the productivity energy. The moon actually transmutes sun energy um, into something that's actually even more healthy for us. Like I said, we've been having solar flares. The sun during the peak of the day isn't particularly good for you on high radiation days. And so when we go into the shadow, into the darkness, we can traverse areas that we have been ignoring. And sometimes it's things that have been ignored for generations, and things that have been misunderstood, um, things that have been passed on. And I don't just mean genetically, it gets passed on genetically, but it also gets passed on behaviorally. And that's what I want to talk about mostly, is the fact that you can heal from your ancestral trauma. And you would be surprised how many illnesses and diseases and mental limitations, that even physical limitations that you might have, that could be actually a lot of your struggle might not be your shortcoming. It might be something that you need to understand on a deeper level from your ancestry. And it's the same as watching the evolution of an animal species And the way that scientists view that, and they can watch and they can say, and then these animals started to develop this tendency, and then that caused this thing to change for them socially, and then, maybe also caused some of them to develop this disability or this ability. That's how evolution works. Evolution can go in a positive way, it can go in a negative way, it could be a neutral way, it goes in all different ways. So, right now, the most important thing we need to be doing is utilizing our ability to evolve from the earth shifts that are happening into a positive way so that we can live the lives that we need to live, however that needs to be, in the diversity that we are. So, it's getting more difficult to deal with energy for people that are not adapting into having a ritualistic self-care type of life that constantly is detoxing and realigning them with the cosmic frequencies, the organic frequencies, the frequencies of the true self on the inside. I can't speak for a lot of other cultures because I live in America. I do know people who don't live in America, but I don't want to pretend to know what's going on in the whole world. What I can say is that Americans are working a lot more. Um, and part of that is because prices are going up and stuff like that. But people are not spending enough time resetting themselves. They're not spending enough time processing. Um, and it's causing disorders, disabilities, dysfunctions to increase. And the the fact that we need to process things is becoming more prevalent because the world needs to stand up and make changes so that people are able to live lives where they're fulfilled, where they're happy, where they're able to accomplish the things that make them fulfilled and make them happy. And without that, we don't produce enough dopamine to live happy lives. As it's become as if happiness is like an option, and it actually, neurologically it is not, physiologically it is not. And processing ancestral trauma can be one of the main things that you can do to, first of all, realize that it wasn't all that you just did this to yourself, or it wasn't even your your parents did this to you, or even their grandparents. I mean, it goes back hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of years, sometimes, the suffering that has been passed down. And if you have a physical ailment that has been labeled genetically passed down, the first thing I'm going to say is that you are not doomed to suffer that fate that your dad did, your grandfather did, your parents, whoever that you're related to in the past, say they suffered their whole lives and died, or suffered at the end of their life and died too young. You're not, that does not have to happen to you. Um, our bodies contain DNA that goes all the way back to us being a single-celled organism. If you were to unravel that DNA, it would go all the way from here to Pluto. And that contains all of the information of the experiences and adaptations and evolutions that have happened through all of your ancestry for the entire time it was lived, far before you were even human. If you have the ability to take the time to relax your body and give it the proper nutrition, which raw things are really the best. And if you're capable of giving yourself proper nutrition, vitamins, proteins, and then you're able to relax yourself, and there's, whatever you need to do supplementary wise to relax yourself, there's things you can do. Also, magnesium's very good for that. Taking baths are very good for that. But whatever you need to do to relax that's natural and good for your body. And take the time to sit in your emotions, as hard as it can be to sit still and not distract yourself. Because we've now been starting to get conditioned to distract ourselves with devices. Television's been around now for about 100 years. And I mean, before that, there was theater and, film, but it wasn't in everyone's house. So there being a device that you could stare at to distract yourself has only been around for about 100 years. And it's gotten significantly worse with these smaller devices that we can carry around with us, and the fact that we have access to interesting things at any moment. But these are not survival needs, and people who think that they are don't understand that it takes about 20,000 years for something to become a survival need. And outside of something directly, like somebody whose pancreas doesn't work and needs insulin, which I've even seen some of those people heal that. The coping mechanism isn't the same as the coping process. Now, the coping mechanism is actually unhealthy, and it means that you're distracting yourself from coping. And that everybody thinks that coping, they just put mechanism, they think that's the only term. Coping is a process where you allow yourself to disconnect from everything and get away from distracting devices and frequencies. Going into nature's very productive as far as clearing your energy, being around plants and animals. It really helps reset your body into an organic frequency connected to the planet. And when you do that and you slow down and you let whatever the things are wash over you that you have been avoiding because the breakdown would take you away from your job, your family, your friends, your whatever, the obligations, anything can become a distraction, even art. Art can be beneficial. Art is mostly beneficial, but I'm just saying anything can become a distraction. Anything can become an addiction. Distractions are addictions. Social media is the worst distraction addiction, and it messes with your brain chemistry as much as a hard drug addiction. So we need to be able to sit in our own feelings, and talking to other people about them can help to some extent. But right now, I've noticed that it's actually more important to come to a conclusion in yourself first, and then go share that conclusion, the positive conclusion, or whatever it is, the change that you're going to make, and bring that inspiring part to the world, rather than trying to come to the conclusion with someone else, because other people aren't going to have the ability to understand the complexity of your life, and especially with ancestral trauma. So I hope that a lot of people watching this actually have education about their family. I know that a lot of people in America grow up without being told about their ancestry, and that's very sad. It's getting to the point now where people are calling themselves American when that isn't even possible to be a heritage. Again, we've only been here for a couple of 100 years, and it would take a minimum of 20,000 years to even adapt. American is not a heritage, it's not an ancestry, it's not a race, it's a geological location. And the only people that can claim that are the Native Americans that have been here for hundreds of thousands of years. So I'm 4 different types of Native American, so I can say that I have American heritage. But I even go farther than that to see when certain tribes that I'm descended from migrated here from Asia. So I'll take it back as far as it can possibly go. And I implore you to do ancestral research, especially now with the internet. At least if you can find out who your grandparents and great grandparents were, you should be able to find some level of a family tree that you can follow. And don't just follow the surname of the man, because that only gives you half of the story. And you want to follow the surname of the women as well. And you want to find out what your tribal heritage was, because everyone, if you go back far enough, has a tribal heritage. Everyone was brown at some point. Everyone had a tribal heritage at some point. And I implore you to try to take your anthropological and historical research back as far as you can. And when you're doing that, you will find, at least I have found, and I know many other people have found, things that activate ancient memories in us and make us feel and think things when reading stories, even if they're mythology related to our ancestry. And those are all very important things. But that even aside, even if you know nothing about any of that stuff about your ancestry, what you will inevitably what you will know is how you were treated by your parents and your grandparents and your immediate family. You'll know to some extent how they were treated. You'll know what physical and mental ailments have manifested that have become hereditary. And through looking at that stuff, you can really gain some insight. Cancer is the body's attempt to mutate and adapt when it is living in conditions that are not good enough for its health, whether that be energetic or physical, nutrition, the job you work, the people you're around, the town you live in. It's many different things. Cancer is from living a life that you need to not live, from needing to make a better life for yourself. It doesn't just happen. It's not just a spontaneous thing that happened because it's in your DNA, because it happened because it was in the DNA of your parents and grandparents. Because if you are able to use spiritual and energetic tools, meditation and reset, exercise, and connecting to nature, if you live a ritualistic life that includes a big chunk of self-care away from distraction and people, these spiritual tools, along with plant medicines, can give you the time and the space in order to be able to process the things you need to process, so your histone, which is your DNA strand wrapped in a ball, will unroll, and then your mitochondria can interact with further back pieces of your DNA than, let's say, your parents or your grandparents were able to do, because they sacrificed. At some point, there was a sacrifice of the tribal, ritualistic, spiritual tools necessary to bring those states of rejuvenation and renewal. And modern culture very much pushed to make that happen. And people gave up their tribal heritage, and in a large portion of them traded it in for Christianity or some other acceptable form of religion. And people were ridiculed, burned at the stake, about all this kind of stuff. And people were pushed into a corner and conditioned out of using their ritualistic tools. And you don't have to have been trained by anybody. You don't have to learn any of this stuff from other people. If you want to do that, if you want to go, and it doesn't even have to be your own ancestry. If you want to go to a Buddhist retreat or some other spiritual nature retreat, I will say that not all of them are beneficial. I will say that not all of them, I will say there are quite a few of them that are scams. I really believe in doing it on your own. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to take some trips to South America and hang out with some different native people. And I've already hung out with a lot of different types of tribal native people from all over the world, and was raised native. And I've gone through a lot of shamanistic trials and stuff like that, and helped a lot of people. But you don't need anything to do what I'm talking about other than a space of peace and quiet, and a space to maybe go outside. Um, and maybe to Another thing that can really help is fasting or detoxing, not eating anything that's unnatural, just eating simple. Doing a fasting detoxing type of thing, your body goes into a deep regeneration state starting at about 24 hours of fasting to 72. I mean, of course, you have to be careful if you have sensitive stomach and sensitive dietary needs related to glycemic indexes, like diabetes and stuff like that. But fasting, sitting still, no matter how bad you feel, if you keep sitting through it, eventually you'll break down, you'll cry. And I think writing is also really important, but in a notebook, right? In a notebook, that can be really beneficial during that time. And just think about how you grew up. Now, everything before you were 5 years old was the most impactive things that happened in your life. Until you are 5 years old, those things are the things that really impact your development. There's a sort of thing that shifts when you're about 5 years old, and then after that, whatever happened to you is sort of set in to some extent. So try to think about what happened before you were 5 years old. Go through those memories and try to allow yourself to feel the feelings that you had, the thoughts that you had, the desires that you had, the experiences that you had, and the way that they made you feel. Allow yourself to go through that again. And you'll notice that a lot of those things relate to whatever in your current situation, what your triggers are, what your limitations are, what things you like and dislike. You'll be surprised how often it relates all the way back to that time. And think about the way your parents treated you, the way they treated each other, your family situation. Even if you were in a foster home or adopted, it doesn't have to be people that were related to you, but it can still have to do with ancestral trauma. The biggest thing that has to do with ancestral trauma is generations of people that were oppressed until an adaptation was made that may have manifested as an illness, because, like autism, for instance, is a reaction to a lot of oppression in our society, making these people that cannot conform. And so for every limitation that you have, there's actually a change that needs to be made to fix your life. And then if you were to have children, or even people you just interact with in your life, they don't have to share the same DNA as you, and you'll pass on the good behavior. You'll pass on the freedom of being able to live your own life, inspire people in that way. And that's how we stop the ancestral trauma that gets passed down. It gets passed down from getting treated a certain way by people. And the people that impact us the most are the people we're related to. And because we share DNA with the people that we're related to, that can easily trigger the same parts in our DNA from the same behaviors, the same type of environment, the same type of oppression. These things get consciously and unconsciously passed down. It could be as much as, how people were taught to eat, how they were taught to talk, how they were taught to have their work ethic or their social ethic. And people have a tendency, not everybody's like this, but people have a tendency to pass on the suffering and have the idea that I had to suffer, so therefore you have to suffer, as if that suffering is an inescapable need in life and in the world, as if it's something you have to go through that teaches you something or strengthens you in a certain way. And truth be told, no one has the ability to make those decisions for you. And it's wrong for parents or any other kinds of authorities in our life to tell us that that's just life and you have to suffer because I did or because other people did, or play down your suffering because you're not suffering as bad as other people are suffering in a different part of the world, or whatever, or just other people in general. What we should be trying to do is lessen suffering for each other, because having peace is so important for our body, for our mind, and for our spirit. And living a life where we are not allowed to be happy and feel good, it disconnects us from our instincts. And whereas I am going to say that all of our instinct, like obviously we have to deny a lot of our instincts because that's what being sentient is about, but we can't deny all of them. And we need to be able to develop a connection to our inner self through slowing down and not being told what to do, forced into doing things that don't feel right. We need to be able to just make decisions. And I think a lot of people don't really grow up because they never learn how to make their own decisions based on what feels good in their body, in their mind, in their heart, in their life, to build the life that they actually want. And we can't have anything we want, like infinitely, but we need to feel like we have some control over the manifestation of how our timeline goes. It's a physiological requirement for us to do that, to have controlled outcomes so that we produce enough dopamine that we can actually not just be happy, but actually the functions of our organs and our body do not work without that dopamine, and taking a pill is not the answer. Changing your life is the answer. So a lot of people are stuck in situations with families that have mistreated them, that have misunderstood them, and it's our family, so we don't want to abandon them. And in a lot of cases, they abandoned us, so we don't want to abandon them back. And it's good to want to keep your family in your life. And the circumstance can go both ways, where sometimes people really actually do need to cut their family out of their life. Sometimes the people in their family are going to continuously treat the person in a way that will lead to dysfunction, thus illness, and eventually death and an unhappy life. And we can't let that happen at any cost. So sometimes when people have permanently left the family, you need to have forgiveness for that and understanding for it. And then there are also a lot of situations where it is possible to reconnect with the people in your family that you're estranged from and heal the connection. Now, I am not going to say that is always possible. It is not always possible. For it to always be possible would cause you to have to conform, and then you would end up being the one being unhappy. So that's not the end result here is not for your family to be unhappy, or for your family to be happy and for you to be unhappy. If it has to be your family's unhappy and you're happy, that's what you're going to have to choose. You're going to have to choose yourself in the end if it's not possible to make peace. But you want to try as hard as you can, because after these people die, you are going to regret not trying, not saying goodbye, not expressing the hurts and pains that you had, not trying to get sympathy back for it. And if you can't get the sympathy back for it that you need eventually, you got to come to a place in yourself through your own meditation and processing to the conclusions of, You know that you needed to get treated better. You know it was possible to get treated better, because everyone is not always doing their best with what they had. That's the label. That is the most untrue statement that people make about their family just to get them off the hook. It's just, oh, they did the best with what they had. Everybody needs to get over that, because they may have done the best with what they had, and they may not have done the best with what they had. And you might have the ability to know they really didn't. And so it's, people don't need to be dragging each other down with negative comments. And there's no thing that causes people to have to do that. There's people in extreme situations that treat their family wonderfully, and nobody's off the hook for having derogatory behavior towards people that they're supposed to care about, that drags down their energy in a way that impairs them. Nobody gets off the hook for that. And that's the first thing that I want everybody want. That's one of the things that I want people to realize, is that it starts with you, though. You have to be the first one to not reciprocate the negative behavior. And that's what passing on the ancestral trauma is. It's someone treats you negatively, so you treat them negatively back, or you treat someone else negatively. And negative is, I guess that's not particularly a good label. In treating someone in a way that does not make them feel supported, concluded, doesn't give them the outcome that they need to feel better about their lives. And sometimes realism isn't going to do that for people, but we all need to know, if we're going to have family in our life, that we can make the changes we want to make in our life without being judged. Oftentimes it's almost like families act like they own you, and they act like they have a right to have a say in, or possibly judge or look down on you based on the direction you take your life in, or the decisions you make. That's not what family's for. What family is supposed to be for is the people that will be there no matter what, to love you, to support you, to try to understand you, to appreciate you. Those are the things that family is supposed to be for. Financial obligations in families can be really bad, because people who are helping other people out financially tend to think that that means that they have the right to judge and tell people how to live their lives, when it actually doesn't. It's actually manipulative if one of your family members was to say, help you out, but only if you do a certain thing in your life. I mean, I can understand some incentive to do something like not be a drug addict anymore so that you don't die, and get a reward for that. So I'm not saying it's altruistic, but I don't see very many people giving and receiving without one person using it as leverage of manipulation over another person. And that tends to be very prevalent, especially in families that have money, and regarding to inheritances, and things can get very corrupt. And the next thing you know, people are not being themselves so that they can receive something. And it goes on the other end too, because if you're allowing yourself to not be yourself in order to receive something, then you're being insincere, and that's your bad too. So in some instances, you might need to deal with the suffering and changes and working harder, or whatever it is that you need to do to not receive financial help from people, so that you can free yourself from having to be under the guise of what they want from you out of the situation. Everything that's going on right now in history is leading us towards needing more freedom. Socially, it's hard to even have freedom in a friend group anymore, because people will think that you need to think and feel and believe the same things as them. And that's why family is so important, to be able to actually have a family structure of people that just love and support each other, no matter what happens, no matter what anybody does. A place free of that judgment is the only home that we can ever really have when we go to sleep at night, if we know that we have somewhere to go that has that home, that place where we could talk about anything, the place where we could be understood about our feelings. It's important that we forge those connections in general in the world, but especially if we are going to have people in our lives that we're related to, because they are so much like us genetically that if we have the ability to have a new understanding and we get them to understand it, we might be able to help them heal too. And so let me try to think of some instances here. Well, I was already talking about how if people think, oh, well, that suffering that you're having is just something we've all had to deal with, so you have to deal with it too. If you're the one who stands up and says, I cannot deal with this suffering because it's impairing my ability to live my life, I'm not going to deal with this suffering because it's impairing my ability to live my life, then one of two things will happen, and it will probably be a long process, and people will probably in your life, if they're the more aggressive type of people, they may try to keep forcing it on you and keep forcing it on you, in which case you'll have to distance yourself from the situation. And sometimes that distance that you take away from your family will give them some time to think about it and gain insight. And if you can return every so often and just say, I'm not going to tolerate this type of suffering just because you did. I'm not going to tolerate you putting me down, judging me, dismissing me, not being willing to listen to my life, or having an inability to appreciate my accomplishments, whatever it is. If you just say, I'm not going to tolerate this suffering, that is what will begin the possibility of processing the ancestral trauma for more than just yourself. But in the end, it might just only be for yourself. And if it is, that's okay. Because if you're not going to pass on the suffering, not pass on the idea of someone else needs to suffer because you're suffering, if you're not going to treat anybody else in that way, then whether or not your family chooses to heal, you've healed, and you're not going to pass on the ancestral trauma, which means it will die. It will die. If you don't have children and people in your life that you oppress and say, you have to suffer because I suffered, and I'm going to, think it's okay for you to live a life where you're unhappy. If you're not doing that, then you're ending the ancestral trauma. So there's really nobody else that can interfere with your ability to end the ancestral trauma. Going and making amends with your family members, attempting to do that is the best idea if you have the ability to do that. And if you can give them the deep insight of your own suffering, you most likely will find out that they suffered in the same way. And then you can help them process that. And then you can end the behavior between the two of you and have an amazing open relationship where you don't have to worry about the other person making you suffer. And that person doesn't have to worry about making themselves suffer anymore, because people have been oppressed for so many generations that they don't even realize they're doing this stuff. But if you just take it into the simplicity of suffering and it impairing your ability to live your life, if you are having an inability to live your life, if you are impaired from living your life the way that you need to live your life, if you're not functioning in some way, whether it's an ailment or a limitation keeping you from moving forward in life, these things, and ending the suffering an oppression that you're experiencing, will make those things get better. And sometimes it's a very, very long and hard road. Sometimes it takes a lot of transformation. Sometimes you have to go into situations that they start as something very uncomfortable. We have to go into a lot of uncomfortable places to create extreme changes in our life. And I like to use the metaphor of getting up, and like if I was to get up and just walk from here to South America with nothing and start my life over, it can be that extreme, the amount that you would have to endure to change your life. But someday, now that was just a metaphor, but in reality, someday, if you put a lot of effort into it and you focus on what works for you the best, that you're making your own decisions to make without being guided by other people's obligations and oppression, you will find yourself feeling better because you made your own decisions. The ancestral trauma didn't make them. The baggage didn't make them. The oppression didn't make them. The suffering didn't make them. When you lessen the suffering, then you will be able to think straight. And when you spend the time alone thinking and feeling, you will be able to remember who you really are, or who you really want to be, and the things you want to work towards, and the things that you believe in, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I hope that some of you can come to good conclusions with this. It connects to everything, and everything connects to it. And it's just one, ancestral trauma is just one example of many of the different types of oppressive trauma that we're holding on to in our lives, that have possibly even gone on for generations, where people have been feeling forced into, or in some situations actually forced into, lives that did not allow them to live in a way that kept them healthy and happy, which are not options, because otherwise your body will become dysfunctional. And these things are the major cause of all ailments and diseases and dysfunctions. And so many of the things that are wrong with people's health and wrong with people's ability to function in their lives could let up if people were simply allowed to be free. It all comes down to freedom. Families need to stop oppressing people from being free, and need to stop thinking that there's any kind of suffering that is required, because there isn't. We have the ability to work jobs we believe in. We have the ability to sleep as much as we need to, and all of these things. And I know a lot of you watching this are going to tell me, oh, I can't do that because I have kids and this and that and the other thing. I promise you, it is possible for you to integrate a self-care, ritualistic life into your current life so that you can live a healthy life. I promise you. If more people were pushing for these transformational changes in their life, it would become more possible for other people, because the more people stand up and say, I am not going to suffer, I am going to do what I need to do. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to push and work really hard sometimes and that everything's going to be easy, but recoup time, rest time, regeneration time, realignment time, detoxification time, and all of these ritualistic meditation time, exercise time, nature time, all of these things are a required part of your life. And you can't just grumpily be driving your kids out to the river for a couple of hours. That's not going to do it. You've got to take days of processing, especially if you're living a fast-paced life. If you're living a fast-paced, busy life, there's a lot that you're not processing. And processing is the most important thing. And that means sitting still when you don't want to sit still, until you're thinking and feeling the things you don't want to think and feel, until you're coming to conclusions. And when you come to those deep conclusions within yourself, do not compromise them. Now, if you're having a negative mindset, or you're angry or paranoid or fearful, that will not bring you to the positive mindset that I'm talking about. You need to sit until you feel at peace, and the things that you think through the process, and when you finally get to the point of peace, you'll just know, okay, I cannot deal with this behavior that this person is putting onto me. I cannot deal with being treated this way anymore. I cannot deal with this sacrifice that I'm making. And I'm just going to go and I'm going to tell my family, my friends, my partner, my boss, whoever. I'm going to tell them. I'm going to make the change, even if that means I need to make a sacrifice. And no matter who's in your life, they will support the transitionary period, because there's a transitionary period where you have to make a sacrifice in order to make a transition. And your true family are the people who help you through that transition. And you say, I can't do this anymore because this is making me unhappy, and I'm going to make this sacrifice so that I can make this transition. Who's standing behind you? If you have a bunch of people standing there trying to say, oh no, you're obligated. You are obligated to keep living this life of suffering because you're providing these things that affect all these other people. No, that's ancestral trauma. You are not enslaved to serve your family or anything like that in a way that causes you to have suffering, because that suffering will manifest in an illness, will manifest into a dysfunction, and it will eventually destroy your life. Even if you worked 80-hour weeks your whole life and one day died of a heart attack, you will not have gotten to live a life that was fulfilling and happy, and you won't feel good at the end of your life. And even a lot of these people are so oppressed that even at the end of their life, when they're dying, they don't express their pain. And people think, oh, look at that sweet old guy that just worked 80 hours a week his whole life and he's dying with a smile on his face. I have worked with the shamanic wavelength, and I've been there for those people. And no matter how sweet you think those people are, when nobody's around and I go up to those kind of people, they tell me, I just can't tell the truth. I have to even pretend through my own death. And that's not a peaceful way of living. And tribal shamanic cultures accept that we, at the end of our lives especially, or if we're dealing with extreme illness, we are allowed to think and feel and say things, whatever it is, to try to bring peace, to try to bring healing. That's the whole point of tribal culture. Tribal really just means true family. True family, because the word family's been ruined by all these modern ideas where we enslave people, make them oppressed, and make them suffer. And what a tribal family in ancient times, all we had was each other, because there wasn't all these things to distract us and use up our time and energy. There wasn't a world forcing people to overwork themselves in order to survive. And in those times, it was like we had our family and the people close to us, and that's all we had. So we did everything we could to make sure everybody was okay. It was common. And I'm not just talking about some tribal cultures, I'm talking about most of them. It was common for disabled people were treated better than they are now. They were actually, like, in the house with the family, getting taken care of, and it wasn't a big deal. They weren't looked at as weaker people. They were looked at as people that had different abilities. People would do things like stay up all night just because somebody was crying and help them feel better. That was a ritual. They would have a drum and people would be processing, and it's just like it used to be like, something is wrong in our family structure, therefore something's wrong with all of us, and we're going to fix it all together, because it's not okay to suffer, it's not okay to be unhappy, it's not okay to be unhealthy. And a lot of that type of thinking has been lost. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of great families out there. I'm sure there's still families out there that are just like what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's people out there that will want to work out the ancestral trauma. I mean, I'm sure it would feel really good for a lot of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and people like that to understand the passed down behaviors. And it could even be like your diet. Like, if a certain diet was passed down, that diet could be what's causing the heart problem or the diabetes or the cancer or whatever the hereditary thing is that's being passed down. The physiological hereditary things can be fixed. And that just means you need to fix something in your life that they didn't fix. And then once you fix it, you can help them learn how they can fix it too. And even if they don't, well, at least you did. So you have the ability to, no matter what, you, empowered by yourself, have the ability to fix your ancestral trauma. But what it first starts with is fixing yourself. You need to fix yourself. And as you're fixing yourself, you'll realize the things you've been tolerating that you shouldn't have, or the things you have been doing that you shouldn't have, the addictions that you have because they were passed down, or the habits, or whatever it is. And, you know, it could be literally anything. And that's why you got to think about everything you do, why you do it, and whether or not it actually benefits you or not as you go throughout your days. And the more time you spend in stillness and meditation, the more time you spend in the ritualistic resetting that I was talking about. It's like about 3 days is usually a good minimum amount, but I mean, some people do, like in tribal cultures, will do these kind of resets for up to months, and that can be extremely beneficial to detox and realign for that amount of time. So just figuring out a way to make a ritual of self-care, of making yourself feel better, allowing yourself to process your energy, your thoughts and feelings on a really deep level, and then taking that transformation out into the world, to your family, to put a stop to the domino effect of passing down ancestral trauma is completely possible. So make sure that you are, if you're not in a place in life where you can do that, put yourself in a place in life where you can do that. It's really important. Okay? So that's it for today. Ancestral trauma.